Costa Rica driving tips number 23. Don't get stuck behind a truck if you need to go uphill and around 37 hairpin bends. My stop for the next couple of days was Casa, nestled in montane forest and with fantastic views back down to the coast. The escarpment provided a local thermal highway for a procession of black vultures and swallow-tailed kites, and I spent a relaxing late afternoon watching them all pass. At one point, I noticed the kites mobbing a large bird, which very surprisingly turned out to be a magnificent frigate bird, many miles inland and halfway up the mountain. Casa was probably the nicest place I stayed on this trip, and definitely had the best food. With the view from the deck of my cottage, well-vegetated grounds, and a well-stocked feeding station, I got numerous new birds without even having to leave the property. I did venture out to a few places around Casa, including the famous biological station at Las Cruces, where I was lucky to stumble over a feeding flock of various birds. This is how you see a lot of birds in the tropical forests. You can go for a long time without seeing much, but then stumble across a mixed flock of birds, which has you going mad for 10 minutes trying to see everything, identify everything, and with luck, photograph everything. Just outside San Vito, by its airport, is a very small marsh, which is just about the only site in Costa Rica where you can see the localised Cherokee yellowthroat. I popped into the marsh on my last morning to try to see this bird, and I picked up my only tropical mockingbird of the trip on the airport fence. The yellowthroat also performed very well, and gave me a little bit of a sing-song before I started the long trip north. After a 2-hour drive north, at times following the picturesque Rio General, I stopped for lunch at San Isidoro. As I was eating a McDonald's by the side of the road, an appropriately named roadside hawk flew past, landed, and waited patiently while I got my gear out of the car, set up the tripod, and filmed him. Continuing on, hairpin bends came back into fashion as I climbed up towards some of the highest peaks of the Talamanca Mountains. The ascent was broken halfway up by a stop at a small lodge called Bosque de Tolomucu, which for a small fee allows birders to watch over a variety of feeders. There were also large stands of porterweed, a plant whose nectar is many hummingbirds' favourite tipple. In just a couple of hours I got loads of good video and photos here and saw 2 birds, the white-crested coquette and the red-headed barbet, which I didn't see anywhere else on the trip. Late afternoon, I reached my highest altitude of the day at a decidedly chilly Georgina's Cafe at 3,100 metres, the highest cafe in Costa Rica. A quick walk around its gardens gave me my first high elevation birds, including scintillant, volcano and fiery-throated hummingbirds. As the light was starting to fade, the fiery-throated hummingbird didn't really live up to my expectations, but that would change over the next couple of days. The next couple of nights were spent at the Savagre Hotel Natural Reserve and Spa. I know, my body deserved it. The Savagre area is possibly better than Monteverde for views of quetzals, and, after being given a tip-off by the hotel's front desk, I got up early to get a wilderness experience watching a quetzal's nest hole, along with about 150 other people from around the world. It was busier than a British Twitch, and it was a long time before anything more than a couple of tail feathers were visible, so I turned my attention to a passing dark pewee. After about 45 minutes, the quetzal flew out of the hole, and I stormed through a coachload of Chinese tourists and half a dozen people from Leamington for my best views yet of this fantastic bird.
Lovely, very kind, thank you very much.
Be careful there. It's okay.
Oh wow.
It's going to the right? It's going to the right?
With the show over, the crowds departed, and I zoomed back to the hotel to get to the head of the queue for breakfast. I was then quickly out again, birding around the grounds of the hotel and up into the forest behind it. Of course, sod's law, it wasn't long before I found my own quetzal in what was a slightly less crowded wilderness experience. However, this wilderness experience was also then literally soiled by the appearance of a toilet halfway up the forested hill. However, it did give me a much needed comfort break and allowed for the bird watching to remain uninterrupted. There were a few other things in the forest, but messing around with 2 lots of quetzals and a breakfast in between had taken me well past mid-morning, and bird activity had really dropped off. So I called it a day here and went for lunch at Miriam's, a quite famous hummingbird cafe with some fantastic views, great birds and good food. One of the main features at Miriam's are the hummingbird feeders placed on its deck. The birds are so habituated to humans that I even had them perching on my camera while I was trying to take photos. Perhaps the most memorable experience here was watching the standoff between a red-tailed squirrel and an acorn woodpecker. The squirrel was very careful not to get too close to the woodpecker, who gave a reminder every now and then as to who was in charge of the food. In the afternoon, I had 2 speciality birds to find and headed back up to the mountain tops, where the weather was quite dreadful and very cold for Costa Rica. Fortunately, after a bit of work, both birds put in an appearance, the timberline wren and the volcano junco. Although wrens being wrens, I couldn't grab a photo. I didn't mess about with quetzals the next morning, and instead went straight up into the forest, which proved to be a good move. As I was the first person on the paths, the spotted wood quails hadn't been forced back into the deep recesses of the forest and were quite approachable. I also lucked out with a mixed feeding flock, which included good views of another couple of lifers for me. Back in the grounds of the hotel, I noticed a slaty flower piercer at work. This bird uses its highly specialised bill to pierce the base of flowers to access nectar that otherwise would be out of reach. Once this bird had finished its work, a scintillant hummingbird showed that it had also adapted its feeding technique to make use of the flower piercer's work by simply perching and sucking up nectar from the hole made by the flower piercer. After all, why expend energy on hovering when you can just sit and have a relaxing drink? On my way back to the San Jose area, I stopped off at the Mirador de Quetzales, another lodge with quetzals that allows access to its grounds for a small fee. I was quetzaled out by now, and just spent a couple of hours photographing and videoing the stunning hummingbirds, which approached to within inches of the lens. With the excellent light, the fiery-throated hummingbirds now started living up to their name. After an overnight stop in the town of Arosi, I took an early morning jaunt to Tepante National Park, stopping when I crossed a fast-flowing stream, where I got the trifecta of black phoebe, torrent amulet and the Costa Rican subspecies of the American dipper, all sitting next to each other. I'd read a lot of good things about Tepante, but it was a bust for me, and I ended this part of the trip with only a butterfly, a bird, and a waterfall to show for it, before continuing on to Rancho Naturalista.